everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. It's great to be here. It's great to see you. It's another great opportunity to share with each other. To share the Dharma, to share a life with each other, to share being. Just to share. This koan is from a collection called The True Dharma, case 56. Guishan's gift. The case. Guishan said to young Shan, I have a lay student who gave me 3 rolls of silk to buy a temple bell in order to bestow happiness upon the people of the world. Young Shan said, when the lay student brought you the silk for the temple bell, what did he give you? What did you give him in return? Guishan hit the sitting platform 3 times and said, this was my offering. Young Shan said, if you offered him that, how will it benefit him? Guishan again hit the platform 3 times and said, why is it that you dislike this? Young Shan said, it's not that I dislike it. It's just that the gift belongs to everyone. And Guishan said, well, since you know that it belongs to everyone, why did you want me to repay him? Young Shan said, I just wondered how you understood that since it belongs to everyone, you could still make it a gift. And Guishan said, don't you see? The great master Bodhidharma, who came to this land from India, also brought a gift. We are always receiving gifts from others. Commentary. Giving and receiving are non-dual. Self and other are non-dual. When the way is surrendered to the way, you enter the way. In enlightenment, the way invariably comes through itself. The self gives itself for the sake of giving the self. It is purposeless. Other gives to other for the sake of giving the other. There is no intention. Spiritual teachings and material wealth are also non-dual. The practices of giving as well as receiving should always be in accord with need, the imperative of the time, place, position, and degree. To build a bridge, cook a meal, or make an offering is the practice of giving. Loving a mountain, eating a meal, or receiving an offering is the practice of receiving. When such actions are without design, both giver and receiver are united in a single, indivisible thusness. The verse. The great earth innocently nurtures the flowers of spring. Birds trust freely the strength of wind. All of this derives from the power of giving, as does the self coming into being. There's a koan that says, there are those who die of thirst while sitting beside a bucket of water. And there are those who die of starvation while sitting beside a bowl of rice. This is the same as the line in Hakuin Song of Zazen, how near the truth, yet how far we seek. Both of these quotes are speaking about our underlying discontentment and poverty mind, our sense of alienation, and our misguided search for what we believe will put it all to rest. What the Buddha realized, and what all subsequent teachings and sutras try to shed light on, is our intrinsic, untarnished, and perfectly complete true nature. But what is meant by the phrase true nature is quite different than the way we may understand it. since it is referring to the same true nature of everything, like a common underlying thread that runs through the sentient and the insentient. And so as such, it cannot be my true nature, which is the way we naturally think of it or speak about it. I and true nature are essentially non-dual and inseparable. It's actually redundant. My true nature is saying the same thing twice. So where does the idea of possessiveness come from? How could it be my? How could it be gotten from or lost? How could we search for that? Of course, conventionally speaking, it makes sense to use words like I, me, mine. But if we examine our relationship with such words, we can see how attached we are to the meaning we have attributed to them beyond their linguistic functionality. And we may also be able to see how the way we use language, how it maintains the illusion of duality. It also maintains the search and the never finding what we're searching for. So it maintains the illusion of duality and separation, which then leads to feelings of discontent and longing to discover the missing link, missing piece of the puzzle. And the more we think and speak about ourselves in absolute and fixed terms, the more alienated we feel and the further away we get from experiencing true nature. We become blind to the fact that in essence we are what we are looking for. And in our blindness, we act in ways that only disconnect and divide us as human beings. And to change this, we need to have the courage and audacity to go against the grain of personal habits, societal norms, and act in ways that may feel uncomfortable and even threatening to our existence. So for example, instead of resorting to defensive reactivities, we can remain open and supportive. Do the opposite of what may feel at that moment most natural. Instead of rushing to fix judgments and conclusions about ourselves, other people, life, we can work on becoming more comfortable with not knowing and learn to be more gentle, flexible, patient. Instead of meeting diversity with suspicion and fear, which we have a lot of that in this country these days, we can learn to appreciate differences and not let them blind us to the fact that we are essentially the same. Instead of rejecting, we can practice embracing. And instead of grasping and attaching, we can practice giving. It's the antidote that matters. It's not avoiding, it's the doing that makes the change possible. And giving is very powerful. The cultivation of giving is the first paramita of 6 paramitas the Buddha outlined as virtue to perfect through deliberate and intentional practice, known as Dharma paramita. Giving is the motherlode of many spiritual traditions, since it messes up with our cherished identity and it offers a direct way to deconstruct the illusory self. But how we understand or interpret giving is a big question, because the way we understand and practice this paramita will either fortify or deconstruct the illusory self. We can be giving and become more separated, more self-centered. In conventional terms, the words giving, receiving, and that which is being given represent three fixed positions in our minds. And we almost automatically assign meaning to each of these positions, since our conceptual minds paint the giver, the gift, and the receiver with preconceived ideas. Again, naturally. Right? This way of thinking perpetuates expectations and disappointments, and it feeds a contractual relationship between humans, which bears weight on how people interact with each other. For example, we stop at the store to buy a cup of coffee. We often see this encounter between two humans as in a simple transactional interaction of handing over the money, receiving the coffee, saying goodbye. And we get trapped in the defined roles each person takes on, and in labeling the goods being exchanged in that transaction. So 1 coffee to go, please. Here's the money. Thank you. Have a nice day. This transaction ended. This is just one example of many, right? It happens to us so often we don't even recognize the missed opportunities to give and receive that which cannot exchange hands. It's true that we live in a society that encourages commodity-based interactions, but as practitioners, we bear the responsibility to not go along with the conventional way of being and to offer ourselves to direct interactions, completely offering ourselves to direct interactions, even during brief encounters. The Bodhisattva is the one who takes the initiative to step out of the boundaries of convention and offer others what they need rather than what they want. When what we need is not just a cup of coffee. What we need is a mirror to one another. Mirror of being. When we take the initiative to drop the walls and step away from conventional interactions, we realize that the buying a cup of coffee from a vendor can become a vehicle for sharing our heart with one another and for freely sharing the Dharma with everyone. It is how we awaken the true self to itself. We don't have to become entangled by conceptual images of a seller, a buyer, or the goods that are being exchanged. There's another way of giving, another way of being. In one of his sermons, the Buddha spoke about sharing, and he said, "If beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of meagerness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared. If there were someone to receive their gift. But because beings do not know, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they eat without having given. The stain of meagerness overcomes their minds." And he's talking about us, right? We may not want to admit it, but in many ways we do act in such ways. Right? We act in ways that come out of self-concernedness and feed self-concernedness. Now when we take precepts, we vow to give freely. Right? and not to be withholding, which is not a vow to be a good and generous person. It only means to recognize the inner forces that create an imagined barrier between self and other, and then to constantly work on quelling these forces. Generosity, there's nothing special about this. It's an essential aspect of awakening process as it propels us towards the path of realization, and it's also a natural expression of realization. There's nothing special about it because it emanates, it comes out of the true self giving itself to itself. So it's definitely not about being a good guy. Look at me, I'm giving. And also there's so much joy that comes from sharing with others, far greater than grasping and accumulating. And yet there's another kind of energy that in us that wants us to clench and to be stingy, or meagerness energy as he described, right? Energy that encourages us to contract rather than to expand, to build walls rather than bridges, and to divide rather than to unite. An energy that we often may not notice that is working in the background. The teacher in this case, Guishan, 9th century Chinese Zen master, was disciple of Pai Cheng. Guishan, along with his disciple Yang Shan, co-founded one of the 5 schools of Zen, the Guiyang school. And their Zen line, their Zen school, lasted only 5 generations, but through multiple recorded sayings and dialogues, it actually influenced many Zen masters and contributed to the development of the Zen tradition in China. Which means it's still there, it's still here now, today, in our tradition. And in this dialogue, from today's case, Guishan said to Yang Shan, I have a lay student who gave me 3 rolls of silk to buy a temple bell in order to bestow happiness upon the people of the world. Now, back in those days, it was customary for Buddhist followers to help sustain monasteries by providing monetary contributions or any goods that they were able to give, so the practice of the Dharma can continue, and as Guishan says, to bestow for the purpose of bestowing happiness upon the people of the world. You may adjust as needed, just be conscious and aware of that. Now, the word happiness may be better understood as inner contentment, to bestow inner contentment, to remind, to teach about inner contentment. Or is a state of being at ease or at peace internally. But what is it that bestows inner contentment? Can one bestow this on another? Can that be given to another? Now, when we turn towards the Dharma, realize it through experience and align with it, it is by itself an endless source of contentment. But no person can or institution can claim ownership on the Dharma, and no one can receive it from another. So how do we make it a gift? This is the question raised in this koan, and is asking us to examine our understanding of true giving. So Yang Shan said, when the lay student brought you the silk for the temple bell, what did you give him in return? And Guishan hit the platform 3 times and says, this is my offering. This is what I gave back. So Yang Shan said, well, if you offered him this, how will it benefit him? What will he do with this? And Guishan again hit the platform 3 times and said, why is it that you dislike this? It's not that I dislike it, it's just that the gift belongs to everyone. So since it belongs to everyone, why did you want me to repay him? Yangshan said, I just wondered how you understood that point. That since it belongs to everyone, you can still make it a gift. Now that changes everything, doesn't it? Then what we are giving beyond commodity belongs to everyone, is everyone. It's a whole different kind of giving, isn't it? The Dharma includes all things, animate, inanimate, whether valued or despised, regardless of monetary or social values we have attached to them, regardless of the labels, regardless of all the constructs we have created around them and on top of them. So first we may want to contemplate if we actually realize all things as the all-encompassing Dharma. So we have to examine how we see, how we view what we view. Do we understand the meaning of everything is a gift or everything is giving? And if we do realize the Dharma as a gift that everyone has access to, how do we freely give it and freely receive it through our thoughts, our words, and our actions? So Guishan said, don't you see, the great master Bodhidharma, who came to this land from India, also brought a gift. We are always receiving gifts from others. And the footnote to that line says, heaven is filled with it, earth is covered by it. The hand that gives is also the hand that receives. It's the Dharma that is boundless. And so on an essential level, every encounter with one another, or two human beings, is an act of giving and receiving the Dharma. Or any encounter, whether it's a human being or inanimate. So it's giving and receiving the Dharma, and at the same time it is also an act of affirming our boundless true nature. So in that act of giving and receiving, we're also mirroring and affirming. Right then and there, the search is over. And it is saying, right, every moment, every offering is saying, call off the search. In the Taoist text from the 7th century BCE, it says, a sea does not reject water, and therefore is able to bring about its vastness. A mountain does not reject soil, and therefore can bring about its height. An enlightened person does not despise ordinary people, and therefore can bring about a large populace. Dogen commented on this text, saying, you need to realize that a sea's not rejecting water is its being in sympathy with water. Further, you need to realize that the water has the complete virtue of not refusing the sea. For that reason, it is possible for waters to come together to form a sea, and for earth to pile up and form a mountain. And you certainly know for yourself that because one sea does not reject another sea, it forms an ocean, which is something much larger. Because one mountain does not reject another mountain, it forms a larger mountain, which sometimes is much higher. And because an enlightened person does not despise ordinary people, he creates a large populace. This is why Bodhisattva vow to practice manifesting sympathy, and to do so, they need but face all things with a gentle demeanor. In other words, they need to face all things with open heart. Right? Because if we don't, how can we see? How can we mirror to one another? How can we step out of commoditizing one another? Or getting lost in measuring each other against some kind of imagined ruler or standards. How can we see through that if we don't open up? Now think about this in terms of your state of being. Our state of being every day, every moment. What kind of gift you're giving to the people around you when you're grumpy, upset, angry, or act in a stingy way? And what kind of gift you are giving when you are patient, kind, tolerant? We can't stop emanating. We can't stop projecting energy in all directions. This is not a choice. It's just the way it is, the way we are. Which is why it is so important that we actually pay attention to the kind of energies that are going around internally. The kind of energies that are perpetuating the thoughts. The kind of energies that make the thoughts appear on the mouth as words. And the kind of energy that the words propel us to act in certain ways. Because if we're not paying attention, that's what we are sharing with one another. Well, paying attention or not, that's what we're sharing with one another. And when we do pay attention, then we can ask, what is it that I want to share? To share the Dharma is to realize the Dharma. And to realize the Dharma is to share the Dharma. When Guishan hit the sitting platform 3 times and said, "This was my offering," he was manifesting and sharing the Dharma freely. But do we see that? Right? How could this benefit anybody? It's pointless. It is. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's pointless. It's immeasurable. You cannot measure it. You cannot quantify it. You cannot understand the point. And that's what makes it so precious. Beyond conceptual value or devalue. It's also boundless. Right? Is that not boundless? Not the interpretation of the sound or the connotation of a hand meeting a piece of wood. That's already being trapped in conceptual boundaries. That's not what he offered. It may be what we hear. So how do we get beyond our automatic, immediate conceptual categorizing, interpreting, and creating all kinds of mental formations of it? Because if we don't get outside of that trap, then giving is limited and giving is conditional, and it will depend on Who am I with? What do I think about this person? What do I think about myself? And how much should I give in this interaction? It's all measured. And what he's offering here to us is a portal, is a doorway, it's an entry point to step out of this and to experience. So he said, this was my offering. And the footnote says, the sound is still resounding centuries later. Evidently, right? Still, here is that same sound. Here is the same pointer. And here we are listening to it. And it never stops, it never stops echoing this sound he was referring to and expressing. Never stop echoing through the mountains, the oceans, the streets of New York City, the subways, everywhere. It is only bound by the walls we confine ourselves to. Dogen said, when we live the way to the way, we realize the way. When we live the way to the way, we realize the way. When we stop listening to the constant inner chatter, stop being so mesmerized and seduced by our own thoughts, and take a little time to pay close attention, to be thankful for everything and everyone we encounter. When we meet, we can truly appreciate the meaning of freely giving and freely receiving. Bodhidharma described it as the triple emptiness. Triple emptiness. No giver, no gift, no receiver. And that's the way to give. That's the way to receive. And what it's empty of is not that the person is not there doing this, acting in such a way, acting in a generous way. That's there. Love is there. It is empty of what we bestow upon it. It is empty of our own connotations. It is empty of our own thoughts. That's all it's empty of. It is boundless because it is empty. I'll end with a line from Dogen who said, "There are fools who look upon themselves as if they were someone else. And then there are the wise who regard others as themselves." Sit with that for a while.